In case it hasn't been made clear to you yet, we are in full swing election mode right now in the United States, as we just had our first GOP presidential debate, which was somewhat of a show. Either way, there are 5 SHTF events that you should expect to see before the 2024 election, because these things would alter the course of said election cycle. And I think we can all expect something like this to happen based on everything else that's been going on lately. And if you're worried about surviving the 2024 election cycle, then hit the subscribe button below, because these are the conversations we have to have so we can be aware of what these threats may be. Now, the first SHTF threat that you should be concerned about is the rising of a new pandemic. This has been reported on quite a bit recently, and this is starting to be concerning because we all know how the regulations of 2020 applied to the election cycle of that same year. And right now, the Biden administration is supposedly buying equipment and hiring safety protocol officers in order to be prepared for this next pandemic, which they just so happen to start investing in right now. And on August 14th, the VA actually paid $3.3 million to Oddball Incorporated in order to get consulting work done surrounding safety protocols and pandemic response. So I think the idea of a pandemic reoccurring and certain aspects of a pandemic like lockdowns and things of that nature should be expected at this point in time based on everything else we know about the last one. Not to mention, there are reports about a new Parola strain going around, which is just one more thing they're going to throw out there in order to try to sway anybody's opinion or ability to have an opinion here in the near future. So keep an eye out for this next pandemic to occur before the 2024 elections. Now, the second SHTF event that you should be concerned about that is highly likely, regardless of whether or not it has anything to do with the pandemic or anything related to the elections, is entry into a war, full-on war mobilization. And between China and Taiwan, or Russia and Ukraine, there's really no lack of option when it comes to us entering a war in the sense of full mobilization. And that could easily happen at any point in time based on the fact that it takes one mistake for us to find ourselves in the middle of a conventional war. Now, why that should matter to you and why I think it's highly likely for us to see that before the 2024 election is because no president has ever not been reelected during wartime. And of course, those who are in power right now are very aware of that fact. And in fact, if you go back through history, you'll see that Madison, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Johnson, and Nixon were all reelected during wartime. And not to forget good old W, because all of them maintained their position of the presidency because they were in the middle of a war when the reelection occurred. So expectations should be relatively high for that to be a real possibility. Now, before we go any further, I need to mention that the biggest supporter of the channel is Midway USA. And thanks to them, I'm constantly able to get out and be better prepared for whatever might come during the 2024 election cycle, which I think we should all be concerned about, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on, because this applies to all Americans, regardless of whether or not you like to vote one way or the other. So keep that in mind, and a big thanks to Midway USA. Now, the third SHTF event that I think you should be concerned about and could easily cause a national crisis is assassination. And when I say that, what I mean is that recently, during an interview between Tucker Carlson and former President Trump, there was quite a bit of talk surrounding the idea of assassination. And the reason behind it was because of the escalatory nature as to which attacks have been sent upon Donald Trump since he's ever become president. And it's gone from impeachments to indictments. And even though all these things would generally be considered a negative for most presidential candidates, all it seems to be doing is making him more and more popular. So at a certain point, what else is there left to do? And the idea of assassination for polarizing presidents throughout history has a lot of precedent because we've seen it happen more than once. So this is something you should be concerned about, because if that were to occur, the national outrage because of that situation would be something we haven't experienced here in this country. And I think it can lead us down a very dangerous path, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on. And I think there's good reason to believe that some of those who are willing to go the extra mile when it comes to maintaining power have demonstrated in the past that they're not willing to let someone get in their way, whether or not they need to stay alive as part of that equation existing matters or not. So these are things that I think we should definitely keep in mind, and I think it's very possible that these things could occur here before the 2024 election cycle, especially when this person doesn't seem to ever be damaged by anything. And the only way to stop that is to make them not part of the equation. So here's another thing that I would definitely be keeping in mind. The fourth SHTF event that could definitely cause some ripple effects as well would be health failure of our current president. So Biden can leave at any moment and blame health failures of any kind, and no one would second guess it or question it at all. And honestly, it's very likely to happen. In fact, people have been speculating about it ever since he took the presidency because he's very old and he definitely has some cognitive issues, if you haven't noticed. So that being said, a lot of speculation is around the idea of him resigning all of a sudden right before the election cycle and possibly even replacing Kamala Harris in the meantime, and then during that resignation allowing Gavin Newsom or someone of that nature to take over that position, who then suddenly becomes president. And then that new president who just suddenly became the president is now campaigning as president against whoever their rival may be. And that's a huge issue as well. I think it could have similar ramifications to what we're seeing happening right now with Donald Trump. Because if you look at it from either side of the aisle, you're having basically manipulation of the leadership that was chosen by the people, however you want to look at that. And that manipulation is now putting someone else in that position of power who was never meant to be there in the sense of by choice of the people. So all these things could lead us down a very dangerous path in the sense of a national crisis. And I could see this being a really big deal if it were to occur. And I would expect it at this point in time because Biden is failing health-wise in many, many ways. And in fact, he is not fit to be president. I don't care who you are or how you vote. Anyone should be able to admit that and not feel bad about it. So the fifth SHTF event that I would be expecting before the election of 2024. And this is the big one because I think that maybe we haven't put enough thought into this concept, but I think it has some validity, especially based on some of the telegraphing that's been put out there over the last couple of years, okay? A grid down scenario would be the ultimate form of election manipulation because honestly, it allows for a lot of things to occur under the radar because the radar has no power. So the Biden admin has claimed that China has planted malware in US military installations that also affects domestic communications networks as well as power grids. And we know that this is a huge threat from China, that they could shut us down at almost any point in time. But they've also told us exactly what has happened and who did it, so that way when it does happen, we already know exactly what happened and who did it. But what would it look like to try to hold an election during a power outage? Well, we had some insight into that when contingency plans were written up during Hurricane Sandy, because that happened during the time of an election year. And interestingly enough, all the contingency plans go to the idea of going back to paper ballots, which a lot of people would think is a good thing. However, I would say that during a power outage, without any oversight or surveillance or even lights of any kind, having paper ballots and then having the volunteers count those ballots would lead us down a couple of different paths. One, how much trust could you put into those counts or into those paper ballots? How much verification could there really be made? And how long would this process take? How long of a delay would there be to get results? And we all know that while things are delayed, more and more things tend to happen or pop up suddenly when it comes to counting additional votes. So a lot of extracurricular things can occur during a power outage regarding paper ballots, counting by hand, and everything else related to ensuring a proper election. So I would expect all 5 of these things to be a real possibility to happen before the 2024 election. And in fact, in many ways, almost all of them could happen simultaneously. There's actually no reason to believe that they all won't happen together as one. Because in reality, if the pandemic breaks out, then you suddenly have a reason to lock everybody down. And then suddenly we enter ourselves into a war because this pandemic's created new scenarios where obviously economic turmoil begins, and then we have enemies overseas like China who we suddenly have to be in a war with, and Taiwan is the reason for it. But also don't forget that China has the keys to the city when it comes to our power grid, so therefore now they're the reason why everything got shut down. Not to mention this political opponent who just gets stronger and stronger and stronger no matter what you do to them. You could send them to prison, you could torture them, nothing you could do is going to stop them from gaining more and more momentum. So suddenly there's an accident or something bad happens that wasn't under surveillance because guess what? The power grid was down, there was nothing to see, nobody was there to witness anything, so we're not really sure what happened, but all we know is that he's no longer part of the equation. And of course, because of the turmoil and everything else going on, we need strong leadership, so therefore Joe Biden can't really do it anymore because he has health problems that suddenly showed up, so he has to tap somebody else, but he knows Kamala Harris isn't strong enough to actually lead us through a war with China, so we got to find somebody who's a little bit smarter, a little bit better looking, and can handle the position a little bit better, which is Gavin Newsom. So tap him on the shoulder, now he's in, suddenly the main political opponent no longer exists, we're in a wartime, now the other opponents who are on that side of the aisle don't really have a chance against someone with the powerhouse funding of Gavin Newsom, and next thing you know, we are in 2025. Reasonable? You tell me, but this is just my thought process, and these are the weird things that I like to share with everybody because I want to keep your minds working on overtime based on some of the threats that we're facing here in the future. So if you have anything else to add, let me know in the comments below. I know this is a contentious subject, and we don't like to get overly political, and I don't think this is a very political video. I think that this affects everyone no matter who you vote for and no matter how you think. So you should be preparing for these things to happen no matter which side of the aisle you're on. I'm not here to try to promote anybody or designate anybody a savior, but what I am doing is logically reading the information that's presented to us and then looking between the lines in order to find out exactly what might be planned, and this is where my conclusions go. So, anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com, and besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.